Hello there. Today I am going to read you a bedtime story while I slay the spire. I love falling asleep to slay the spire videos because it's low stakes, it's slightly boring, but it's just interesting enough to help my brain drift off. And rather than try to come up with good words to say, I'm just going to borrow some words. I'll be reading from the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. It is about rediscovering the archetypes of the mature masculine. So get cozy and prepare for the best sleep of your life. Chapter 1 is called The Crisis in Masculine Ritual Process. We hear it said of some man that he just can't get himself together. What this means on a deep level is that so-and-so is not experiencing and cannot experience his deep, cohesive structures. He is fragmented. Various parts of his personality are split off from each other and leading fairly independent and often chaotic lives. A man who cannot get it together is a man who has probably not had the opportunity to undergo ritual initiation into the deep structures of manhood. He remains a boy, not because he wants to, but because no one has shown him the way to transform his boy energies into man energies. No one has led him into direct and healing experiences of the inner world of the masculine potentials. When we visit the caves of our distant Cro-Magnon ancestors in France and descend into the dark of those otherworldly and innerworldly sanctuaries and light our lamps, we jump back in startled awe and wonder at the mysterious hidden wellsprings of masculine might we see depicted there. We feel something deep move within us. Here, in silent song, the magic animals, bison, antelope, and mammoth, leap and thunder in pristine beauty and force across the high vaulted ceilings and the undulating walls, moving purposefully into the shadows of the folds of the rock, then springing at us again in the light of our lamps. And here, painted with them, are the handprints of men, of the artist hunters, the ancient warriors and providers, who met here and performed their primeval rituals. Anthropologists are almost universally agreed that these cave sanctuaries were created, in part at least, by men, for men, and specifically for the ritual initiation of boys into the mysterious world of male responsibility and masculine spirituality. But ritual process for the making of men out of boys is not limited to our conjectures about these ancient caves. As many scholars have shown, most notable among them Mircea Eliade and Victor Turner, ritual initiatory process still survives in tribal cultures to this day, in Africa, South America, islands in the South Pacific, and many other places. It survived until very recent times among the Plains Indians of North America. The study of ritual process by the specialist may tend towards dry reading, but we may see it enacted colorfully in a number of contemporary movies. Movies are like ancient folk tales and myths. They are stories we tell ourselves, about our lives and their meaning. In fact, initiatory process for both men and women is one of the great hidden themes of many of our movies. A good explicit example of this can be found in the movie The Emerald Forest. Here, a white boy has been captured and raised by Brazilian Indians. One day, he He's playing in the river with a beautiful girl. The chief has noticed his interest in this girl for some time. This awakening of sexual interest in the boy is a signal to the wise chief. He appears on the riverbank with his wife and some of the tribal elders and surprises Tommy, at play with the girl. The chief booms out, "Tommy, your time has come to die." Everyone seems profoundly shaken. The chief's wife, playing the part of all women, of all mothers, asks, "Must he die?" The chief threateningly replies, "Yes." Then we see a firelit nighttime scene in which Tommy is seemingly tortured by the older men in the tribe and forced into the forest vines. He is being eaten alive by jungle ants. He writhes in agony, his body mutilated in the jaws of the hungry ants. We fear the worst. Finally, the sun comes up, though, and Tommy, still breathing, is taken down to the river by the men and bathed, the clinging ants washed from his body. The chief then raises his voice and says, "The boy is dead, and the man is born." And with that, he is given his first spiritual experience, induced by a drug blown through a long pipe into his nose. He hallucinates, and in his hallucination discovers his animal soul, an eagle, and soars above the world in new and expanded consciousness, seeing, as if from a God's eye view, the totality of his jungle world. Then he is allowed to marry. Tommy is a man. And as he takes on a man's responsibilities and identity, he is moved first into the position of a brave in the tribe, and then into the position of chief. It can be said that life's perhaps most fundamental dynamic is the attempt to move from a lower form of experience and consciousness to a higher or deeper level of consciousness, from a diffuse identity to a more consolidated and structured identity. All of human life, at least, attempts to move forward along these lines. We seek initiation into adulthood, into adult responsibilities and duties toward ourselves and others, into adult joys and adult rights, and into adult spirituality. Tribal societies had highly specific notions about adulthood, both masculine and feminine, and how to get it. And they had ritual processes, like the one in the Emerald Forest, to enable their children to achieve what we could call calm, secure maturity. Our own culture has pseudo-rituals instead. There are many pseudo-initiations for men in our culture. Conscription into the military is one. The fantasy is that the humiliation and forced non-identity of boot camp will make a man out of you. The gangs of our major cities are another manifestation of pseudo-initiation, and so are the prison systems, which, in large measure, are run by gangs. We call these phenomena pseudo-events for two reasons. For one thing, with the possible exception of military initiation, these processes, though sometimes highly ritualized, especially within city gangs, more often than not initiate the boy into a kind of masculinity that is skewed, stunted, and false. It is a patriarchal manhood, one that is abusive of others and often of self. Sometimes a ritual murder is required of the would-be initiate. Usually the abuse of drugs is involved in the gang culture. The boy may become an acting out adolescent in these systems and achieve a level of development roughly parallel to the level expressed by the society as a whole in its boyish values, though in a contra-cultural form. But these pseudo-initiations will not produce men. because real men are not wantonly violent or hostile. Boy psychology, which we'll look at in more detail in Chapter 3, is charged with the struggle for dominance of others in some form or another. And it is often caught up in the wounding of self as well as others. It is sadomasochistic. Man's psychology is always the opposite. It is nurturing and generative, not wounding and destructive. In order for man's psychology to come into being for any particular man, there needs to be a death. Death, symbolic, psychological, or spiritual, is always a vital part of any initiatory ritual. In psychological terms, the boy ego must die. The old ways of being and doing and thinking and feeling must ritually die before the man can emerge. Pseudo-initiation, through placing some curbs on the boy ego, often amplifies the ego's striving for power and control in a new form, an adolescent form regulated by other adolescents. Effective, transformative initiation absolutely slays the ego and its desires in its old form to resurrect it with a new, subordinate relationship to a previously unknown power or center. Submission to the power of the mature masculine energies always brings forth a new masculine personality that is marked by calm, compassion, clarity of vision, and generativity. A second factor makes most initiations in our culture pseudo-initiations. In most cases, there simply is not a contained ritual process. Ritual process is contained by two things. The first is a sacred space, and the second is a ritual elder, a wise old man or a wise old woman who is completely trustworthy for the initiate and can lead the initiate through the process and deliver him or her intact and enhanced on the other side. Mircea Eliade researched the role of sacred space extensively. He concluded that space that has been ritually hallowed is essential to initiations of every kind. In tribal societies, this space can be a specially constructed hut or house in which the boys awaiting their initiation are held. It can be a cave. Or it can be the vast wilderness into which the would-be initiate is driven in order to die or to find his manhood. The sacred space can be the magic circle of magicians, or, as in more advanced civilizations, it can be an inner room in the precincts of a great temple. This space must be sealed from the influence of the outside world, especially in the case of boys, from the influence of women. Often the initiates are put through terrifying emotional and excruciatingly painful physical trials. They learn to submit to the pain of life, to the ritual elders, and to the masculine traditions and myths of their society. They are taught all the secret wisdom of men, and they are released from the sacred space only when they have successfully completed the ordeal and been reborn as men. The second essential ingredient for a successful initiatory process is the presence of a ritual elder. In the Emerald Forest, this is the chief and the other elders of the tribe. The ritual elder is the man who knows the secret wisdom, who knows the ways of the tribe and the closely guarded men's myths. He is the one who lives out of a vision of mature masculinity. With a scarcity in our culture of mature men, it goes without saying that ritual elders are in desperately short supply. Thus, pseudo-initiations remains skewed toward the reinforcement of boy psychology rather than allowing for movement toward man psychology. Even if some sort of ritual process exists, and even if a kind of sacred space has been set up on the city streets or on the cell block, the crisis in mature masculinity is very much upon us. Lacking adequate models of mature men and lacking the societal cohesion and institutional structures for actualizing ritual process, it's every man for himself. And most of us fall by the wayside with no idea what it was that was the goal of our gender drive or what went wrong in our strivings. We just know that we are anxious, on the verge of feeling impotent, helpless, frustrated, put down, unloved, and unappreciated, often ashamed of being masculine. We just know that our creativity was attacked, our initiative was met with hostility, that we were ignored, belittled, and left holding the empty bag of our lost self-esteem. We cave into a dog-eat-dog world, trying to keep our work and our relationships afloat, losing energy or missing the mark. Many of us seek the generative, affirming, and empowering father, though most of us don't know it. The father who, for most of us, never existed in our actual lives and won't appear, no matter how hard we try to make him appear. However, as students of human mythology, and as Jungians, we believe there is good news. It's this good news for men, as well as women, that we want to share. And it is to this that we now turn. Chapter 2, Masculine Potentials. Those of us who have been influenced by the thinking of the great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung have great reason to hope that the external deficiencies we have encountered in the world as would-be men, the absent father, the immature father, the lack of meaningful ritual process, the scarcity of ritual elders, can be corrected. And we have not only hope, but actual experience as clinicians and as individuals of inner resources, not imagined by psychology before Jung. It is our experience that deep within every man are blueprints that we can also call hardwiring for the calm and positive, mature masculine. Jungians refer to these masculine potentials as archetypes or primordial images. Jung and his successors have found that on the level of the deep unconscious, the psyche of every person is grounded in what Jung called the collective unconscious, made up of instinctual patterns and energy configurations, probably inherited genetically throughout the generations of our species. These archetypes provide the very foundations of our behaviors, our thinking, our feeling, and our characteristic human reactions. They are the image makers that artists and poets and religious prophets are so close to. Jung related them directly to the instincts in other animals. Most of us are familiar with the fact that baby ducks, soon after they are hatched, attach themselves to whomever or whatever is walking by at the time. This phenomenon is called imprinting. It means that the newly hatched duckling is wired for mother or caretaker. It doesn't have to learn. From the outside, as it were, what a caretaker is. The archetype for caretaker comes online shortly after the duckling comes into this world. Unfortunately, however, the mother the duckling meets in those first moments may not be adequate to the task of taking care of it. Nonetheless, although those in the inner world may not live up to the instinctual expectation, they might not even be ducks. The archetype for caretaker forms the duckling's behavior. In a similar way, human beings are wired for mother and father and many other human relationships, as well as all forms of the human experience of the world. And though those in the outer world may not live up to the archetypal expectation, the archetype is nonetheless present. It is constant and universal in all of us. We, like the duckling that mistakes a cat for its mother, mistake our actual parents for the ideal patterns and potentials within us. Archetypal patterns gone awry, skewed into the negative by disastrous encounters with living people in the outside world. That is, in most cases, by inadequate or hostile parents, manifests in our lives as crippling psychological problems. If our parents were, as the psychologist D.W. Winnicott says, good enough, then we are enabled to experience and access the inner blueprints for human relations in a positive way. Sadly, many of us, perhaps the majority, did not receive good enough parenting. The existence of the archetypes is well documented by mountains of clinical evidence from the dreams and daydreams of patients and from careful observation of entrenched patterns of human behavior. It is also documented by in-depth studies of mythology the world over. Again and again, we see the same essential figures appearing in folklore and mythology, and these just happen to appear also in the dreams of people who have no knowledge of these fields. The dying, resurrecting young god, for example, is found in the myths of such diverse people as Christians, Muslim Persians, ancient Sumerians, and modern Native Americans, as well in the dreams of those undergoing psychotherapy. The evidence is great that there are underlying patterns that determine human cognitive and emotional life. Those blueprints appear to be great in number, and they manifest themselves as both male and female. There are archetypes that pattern the thoughts and feelings and relationships of women, and there are archetypes that pattern the thoughts and feelings and relationships of men. In addition, Jungians have found that in every man there is a feminine subpersonality called the anima, made up of the feminine archetypes. And in every woman, there is a masculine subpersonality called the animus, made up of the masculine archetypes. All human beings can access the archetypes to a greater or lesser degree. We do this, in fact, in our interrelating with one another. The whole field is being actively discussed and continually revised as our knowledge about the inner instinctual human world moves forward. We are just beginning to sort out in a systematic way the inner human world that has always manifested itself to us in myth, ritual dreams, and visions. The field of archetypal psychology is in its infancy. We want to show men how they can access these positive archetypal potentials for their own benefit and for the benefit of all those around them, maybe even for the planet. Can any of you relate to this so far? Can you connect it to your own life? A sort of a lack of proper initiation into manhood and sort of staying a boy, staying a man-child, and that lack of initiation following you for the rest of your life into your 20s and 30s, and it's like you sort of missed an opportunity to mature into masculinity at the proper time. In the story, They share at the beginning, the Emerald Forest. It happens as soon as the boy starts to express sexual interest. As soon as he starts to have sexual interest, the chief knows immediately, okay, now it's time. It's time. The hormones are kicking in, and that's such a difficult time, 14. Just neurochemically, like regardless of any sort of initiation. Now we have these, when you're 14, our lives are so cushy. Your life is like as cushy and easy as it will ever be for the rest of your life when you're 14, right? If, unless you're growing up in a rough situation. For me, life was so easy externally then. Internally, it was a struggle, of course. But yeah, at that time, once the hormones kick in, once you start gooning, you start playing with yourself, it's time. You're ready. You're ready for a challenge. You're ready to be brought into manhood. Maybe not like covered in jungle ants and tortured and convinced that you're going to die. There's probably a different way that we could update it for the modern world, but I definitely feel the truth of what he's saying there, that we are severely lacking initiation into manhood. And we have to find it other ways. I mean, what was I doing when I was 13, 14? I was playing World of Warcraft and looking at memes. YouTube was just becoming a thing. I suppose sports, you start playing football or doing, sports are really, that's where we get our masculine initiation now. But I wasn't really interested in the traditional sports they did at school. And maybe some of you can relate. So not only did we miss out on the ritual initiation, but even the sports didn't really appeal. Anyways, I digress. Let's go back to chapter 3, boy psychology. The drug dealer, the ducking and diving political leader, the wife beater, the chronically crabby boss, the hotshot junior executive, the unfaithful husband, the company yes man, the indifferent graduate school advisor, the holier-than-thou minister, the gang member, the father who can never find the time to attend his daughter's school programs, the coach who ridicules his star athletes, the therapist who unconsciously attacks his clients' shining and seeks a kind of gray normalcy for them, the yuppie. All these men have something in common. They are all boys pretending to be men. They got that way, honestly, because nobody showed them what a mature man is like. Their kind of manhood is a pretense to manhood that goes largely undetected, as such, by most of us. We are continually mistaking this man's controlling, threatening, and hostile behaviors for strength. In reality, he is showing an underlying extreme vulnerability and weakness, the vulnerability of the wounded boy. The devastating fact is that most men are fixated at an immature level of development. These early developmental levels are governed by the inner blueprints appropriate to boyhood. When they are allowed to rule what should be adulthood, when the archetypes of boyhood are not built upon and transcended by the ego's appropriate accessing of the archetypes of mature masculinity, they cause us to act out of our hidden, to us, but seldom to others, boyishness. We often talk with affection about boyishness in our culture. The truth is that the boy in each of us, when he is in his appropriate place in our lives, is the source of playfulness, of pleasure, of fun, of energy, of a kind of open-mindedness that is ready for adventure and for the future. But there is another kind of boyishness that remains infantile in our interactions within ourselves and with others when manhood is required. The structure of the archetypes. Each of the archetypal energy potentials in the male psyche, in both its immature and its mature forms, has a triune or three-part structure. At the top of the triangle is the archetype in its fullness. At the bottom of the triangle, the archetype is experienced in what we call a bipolar dysfunctional or shadow form. In both its immature and mature forms, that is, in both mature psychology and man psychology terms, this bipolar dysfunction can be thought of as immature in that it represents a psychological condition that is not integrated or cohesive. Lack of cohesion in the psyche is always a symptom of inadequate development. As the personality of the boy and then the man matures into its appropriate stage of development, the poles of these shadow forms become integrated and unified. Some boys seem more mature than others. They are accessing, no doubt unconsciously, the archetypes of boyhood more fully than are their peers. These boys have achieved a level of integration and inner unity that others have not. Other boys may seem more immature, even taking into account the natural immaturity of boyhood. For example, it is right for a boy to feel the heroic within himself, to see himself as a hero. But many boys cannot do this and become caught in the bipolar shadow forms of the hero, the grandstander bully or the coward. Different archetypes come online at different developmental stages. The first archetype of the immature masculine to power up is the divine child. The precocious child and the Oedipal child are next. The last stage of boyhood is governed by the hero. Human development does not always proceed so neatly, of course. There are mixtures of the archetypal influences all along the way. Interestingly, each of the archetypes of boy psychology gives rise in a complex way to each of the archetypes of mature masculinity. The boy is the father to the man. Thus, the divine child, modulated and enriched by life experiences, becomes the king. The precocious child becomes the magician. The Oedipal child becomes the lover. And the hero becomes the warrior. The four archetypes of boyhood, each with a triangular structure, can be put together to form a pyramid that depicts the structure of the boy's emerging identity. his immature masculine self. The same is true of the structure of the mature masculine self. As we have suggested, the adult man does not lose his boyishness, and the archetypes that form boyhood's foundation do not go away. Since archetypes cannot disappear, the mature man transcends the masculine powers of boyhood, building upon them rather than demolishing them. The resulting structure of the mature masculine self, therefore, is a pyramid over a pyramid. Though images should not be taken too literally, we are arguing that pyramids are universal symbols of the human self. The divine child. The first, the most primal of the immature masculine energies, is the divine child. Well, hold on. There's a footnote. We theorize that self-structure in women is also pyramidal in form, and that when the pyramids of the masculine self and the feminine self are placed end to end, they form an octahedron, an image that graphically represents the Jungian self, which embraces both masculine and feminine qualities. We are all familiar with the Christian story of the birth of the baby Jesus. He is a mystery. He comes from the divine realm, born of a virgin woman. Miraculous things and events attend him. The star, the worshipping shepherds, the wise men from Persia. Surrounded by his worshippers, he occupies the central place, not only in the stable, but in the universe. Even the animals in popular Christmas songs attend him. In the pictures, he radiates light, haloed by the soft, glistening straw he lies upon. Because he is God, he is almighty. At the same time, he is totally vulnerable and helpless. No sooner is he born than the evil King Herod sniffs him out and seeks to kill him. He must be protected and spirited away to Egypt until he can be strong enough to begin his life's work, and until the forces that would destroy him have spent their energy. What is not often realized is that this myth does not stand alone. The religions of the world are rich with stories of the miraculous baby boy. The Christian story itself is modeled in part on the story of the birth of the great Persian prophet Zoroaster, complete with miracles in nature, magi, and threats on his life. In Judaism, there is the story of the baby Moses, born to be the deliverer of his people, to be the great teacher, and the mediator between God and human beings. He was raised as a prince of Egypt, and yet in his first days his life was threatened by an edict from the Pharaoh, and he was placed, helpless and vulnerable, in a reed basket and set adrift on the Nile. The model for this story was the much older legend of the infancy of the great Mesopotamian king Sargon of Akkad. And from all over the world we hear legends about the wondrous infancy of the baby Buddha, the baby Krishna, and the baby Dionysus. Even less known is that this figure of the divine baby boy, universal in our religions, is also universal inside ourselves. This can be seen from the dreams of men in psychoanalysis, who frequently, especially as they start to get better, dream about a baby boy who fills the dream with light and joy and a sense of wonder and refreshment. Often, too, when a man in therapy starts to feel better, the urge comes to him, perhaps for the first time in his life, to have children. These events are signals that something new and creative, fresh and innocent is being born within him. A new phase of his life is beginning. Creative parts of himself that he had been unconscious of are now thrusting upward into awareness. He is experiencing new life. But whenever the divine child within us makes itself known, attack from the Herods, within and without, is not far behind. New life, including new psychological life, is always fragile. When we feel this new energy manifesting within us, we need to move to protect it, because it is going to be attacked. A man may say in his therapy, "I may actually be getting better." And right away, he may be answered by an inner voice that says, "Oh no, you're not. You know you can never be well." It is then time to get the fragile divine child to Egypt. Picking up on the theme in the Christmas story of the adoring animals and the angel's proclamation of peace on earth, we can see in the Greek myth of Orpheus that the divine child is the archetypal energy that prefigures the mature masculine energy of the king. The man-god Orpheus sits at the center of the world, playing his lyre and singing a song that brings all the animals of the forest to him. They are drawn by the song, prey, and predator, and they come together around Orpheus in perfect harmony. Their differences resolved, all of the opposites brought together in a world-transcending order. Characteristic functions of the king, as we shall see. But this theme of the divine child bringing peace and order to the whole world, including the animal world, and animals, looked at psychologically, stand for our own conflicting instincts, is not limited to ancient myths. A young man who had entered analysis once told us a story about an unusual event in his childhood. When he was probably 5 or 6 years old, he told us, he went out into his backyard one spring afternoon, yearning for something that he was too young to identify, but that, upon reflection later in his life, he saw was a yearning for inner peace and harmony and a sense of oneness with all things. He stood with his back to a huge oak tree which grew in his yard, and he began to sing a song he made up as he went along. It was hypnotic for him. He sang his longing, he sang his sadness, and he sang a kind of minor key deep joy. He sang a song of compassion for all living things. It was a kind of self and other soothing lullaby, a song to the baby boy. And pretty soon he began to notice that birds were coming to the tree, a few at a time. He continued singing, and as he sang, more birds came, whirling and circling around the tree and alighting in its branches. At last the tree was filled with birds. It was alive with them. It seemed to him that they had been lured by the beauty and compassion of his song. They confirmed his beauty and answered his yearning by coming to adore him. The tree became a tree of life, and refreshed by this confirmation of his inner divine child, he could go on. The divine child archetype that appears in our myths as Orpheus, as Christ, as the infant Moses, and as various figures in the myths of many religions, in the dreams of men undergoing therapy, and in the actual experiences of boys, appears to be in the hard wiring of us all. We seem to be born with it. It goes by many names and is evaluated differently by the different schools of psychology. Usually, psychologists condemn it, and in effect, try to disconnect their clients from it. The important thing is to see that the divine child is built into us as a primal pattern of the immature masculine. Freud talked about it as the id, the it. He saw it as the primitive or infantile drives, amoral, forceful, and full of godlike pretensions. It was the underlying push of impersonal nature, concerned only with satisfying the unlimited needs of the child. The psychologist Alfred Adler talked about it as the hidden power drive in each of us, as the hidden superiority complex that covers our real sense of vulnerability, weakness, and inferiority. Remember, the divine child is both all-powerful, the center of the universe, and at the same time totally helpless and weak. In fact, that is the actual experience of infants. Heinz Kohut, who developed what he called self-psychology, talks about it as the grandiose self-organization, which is demanding of ourselves and others in ways that can never be fulfilled. The most recent psychoanalytic theory suggests that people who are possessed by or identified with this infantile grandiosity are experiencing a narcissistic personality disorder. The followers of Carl Jung, however, view this divine child differently. They do not see it in largely pathological terms. Jungians believe that the divine child is a vital aspect of the archetypal self. The self with a capital S, because it is different from the ego, which is the self with a small s. For Jungians, the divine child within us is the source of life. It possesses magical, empowering qualities, and getting in touch with it produces an enormous sense of well-being, enthusiasm for life, and great peace and joy, as it did for the young boy under the oak tree. These differing schools of psychoanalysis, we believe, are each right. Each picks up on the two different aspects of this energy, the one integrated and unified, and the other shadow side. At the top of the triangular archetypal structure, we experience the divine child, who renews us and keeps us young at heart. At the base of the triangle, we experience what we call the high chair tyrant and the weakling prince. The high chair tyrant is epitomized by the image of little Lord Fauntleroy sitting in his high chair, banging his spoon on the tray, and screaming for his mother to feed him, kiss him, and attend him. Like a dark version of the Christ child, he is the center of the universe. Others exist to meet his all-powerful needs and desires. But when the food comes, it often does not meet his specifications. It's not good enough. It's not the right kind. It's too hot or too cold, too sweet or too sour. So he spits it on the floor or throws it across the room. If he becomes sufficiently self-righteous, no food, no matter how hungry he is, will be adequate. And if his mother picks him up after failing him so completely, he will scream and twist and reject her advances because they were not offered at exactly the right moment. The high chair tyrant hurts himself with his grandiosity, the limitlessness of his demands, because he rejects the very things that he needs for life, food and love. Characteristics of the high chair tyrant include arrogance, what the Greeks called hubris or overweening pride, childishness in the negative sense, and irresponsibility, even to himself as a mortal infant who has to meet his biological and psychological needs. All of this is what psychologists call inflation or pathological narcissism. The high chair tyrant needs to learn that he is not the center of the universe, and that the universe does not exist to fulfill his every need, or better put, his limitless needs, his pretensions to godhood. It will nurture him, but not in his form as God. The high chair tyrant, through the shadow king, may continue to be a ruling archetypal influence in adulthood. We all know the story of the promising leader, the CEO or the presidential candidate, who starts to rise to great prominence and then shoots himself in the foot. He sabotages his success and crashes to earth. The ancient Greeks said that hubris is always followed by nemesis. The gods always bring down these mortals who get too arrogant, demanding, or inflated. Icarus, for instance, made wings of feathers and wax in order to fly like the birds, aka gods. And then, in his inflation and against his father's warning, he flew too close to the sun. The sun melted the wax, the wings disintegrated, and he plummeted into the sea. We are familiar with the saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. King Louis XVI of France lost his head because of his arrogance. Often, as we men rise in the corporate structure, we gain more and more authority and power. The risk of self-destruction also rises. The boss who only wants yes men, who doesn't want to know what's going on. The president who doesn't want to hear his general's advice. The school principal who can't tolerate criticism from his teachers. All are men possessed by the high chair tyrant, riding for a fall. Riding for a fall. The high chair tyrant who attacks his human host is the perfectionist. He expects the impossible of himself and berates himself, just as his mother did, when he can't meet the demands of the infant within. The tyrant pressures a man for more and better performance and is never satisfied with what he produces. The unfortunate man becomes the slave, as the mother was, of the grandiose 2-year-old inside of him. He has to have more material things. He can't make mistakes. And because he can't possibly meet the demands of the inner tyrant, he develops ulcers and gets sick. He can't, in the end, stand up to the unrelenting pressure. We men often deal with the tyrant by having a heart attack. We go on strike against him. Finally, the only way to escape the little lord is to die. When the high chair tyrant cannot be brought under control, he will manifest in a Stalin, Caligula, or Hitler, all malignant sociopaths. We will become the CEO who would rather see the company fail than deal with our own grandiosity, our own identification with the demanding God within us. We can be little Hitlers, but we're going to destroy our country in the process. It has been said that the divine child wants just to be and to have all things flow toward him. He does not want to do. The artist wants to be admired without having to lift a finger. The CEO wants to sit in his office, enjoying his leather chairs, his cigars, and his attractive secretaries, drawing his high salary and enjoying his perks. But he does not want to do anything for the company. He imagines himself invulnerable and all-important. He often demeans and degrades others who are trying to accomplish something. He is in his high chair, and he is setting himself up to get the axe. The other side of the bipolar shadow of the divine child is the weakling prince. The boy, and later the man, who is possessed by the weakling prince appears to have very little personality, no enthusiasm for life, and very little initiative. This is the boy who needs to be coddled, who dictates to those around him by his silent or his whining and complaining helplessness. He needs to be carried around on a pillow. Everything is too much for him. He rarely joins in children's games. He has few friends. He doesn't do well in school. He is frequently hypochondriacal. His slightest wish is his parents' command. The entire family system revolves around his comfort. He reveals the dishonesty of his helplessness, however, in his dagger-like verbal assaults on his siblings, his biting sarcasm directed against him, and his patent manipulation of their feelings. Because he has convinced his parents that he is a helpless victim of life and that others are picking on him, when a controversy arises between himself and a sibling, his parents tend to punish the sibling and excuse him. The weakling prince is the polar opposite of the high-chair tyrant, and though he rarely throws the tantrums of the tyrant, he nonetheless occupies a less easily detectable throne. As is the case with all bipolar disorders, the ego possessed by one pole will, from time to time, gradually slide or suddenly jump over to the other pole. Using the imagery of bipolar magnetism to describe this phenomenon, we can say that the polarity of the magnet reverses depending on the direction of an electrical current passing through it. When such a reversal occurs in the boy, caught in the bipolar shadow of the divine child, he will switch from tyrannical outbursts to depressed passivity, or from apparent weakness to rageful displays. In order to access the divine child appropriately, we need to acknowledge him, but not identify with him. We need to love and admire the creativity and beauty of his primal aspect of the masculine self. Because if we don't have this connection with him, we are never going to see the possibilities in life. We are never going to seize opportunities for newness and freshness. Whether activist, artist, administrator, or teacher, everyone in a leadership capacity needs to be connected with the creative, playful child in order to manifest his full potential and advance his cause, his company, and generativity and creativity in himself and others. Connection with this archetype keeps us from feeling washed up, bored, and unable to see the abundance of human potential all around us. We have said that therapists often depreciate the grandiose self within their clients, although it is necessary at times for clients to gain emotional and cognitive distance from the divine child. We ourselves have not encountered many men, at least among those who seek therapy, who identify with their creativity. Rather, they usually need to get in touch with it. We want to encourage greatness in men. We want to encourage ambition. We believe that nobody really wants to be sort of gray normal. Often the definition of normal is average. We live, it seems to us, in an age under the curse of normalcy, characterized by the elevation of the mediocre. It seems likely that therapists who persistently depreciate the shining of the grandiose self in their clients are themselves split off from their own divine child. They are envying the beauty and freshness, the creativity and vitality of the child in their clients. The ancient Romans believed that every human baby is born with what they called his or her genius, a guardian spirit assigned at birth. Roman birthday parties were held not so much to honor an individual as to honor that person's genius, the divine being that came into the world with him or her. The Romans knew that it was not the man's ego that was the source of his music, his art, his statecraft, or his courageous deeds. It was the divine child, an aspect of the self within him. We need to ask ourselves two questions. The first one is not whether we are manifesting the high chair tyrant or the weakling prince, but how, because we all are manifesting both to some extent in some form. At the very least, we all do this when we regress into our child, when we are fatigued or extremely frightened. The second question is not whether the creative child exists in us, but how we are honoring him or not honoring him. If we're not feeling him in our personal lives and inner work, then we have to ask ourselves how we are blocking him. The precocious child. There is a wonderful statuette of the ancient Egyptian magician and vizier Imhotep as a boy. Imhotep is sitting on a little throne reading a scroll. His face is gentle and thoughtful, but alive with an inner glow. His eyes look down at the written word that he holds reverently in his hands. His posture shows grace, poise, concentration, and self-confidence. Not a true portrait, this statuette is really an image of the archetype of the precocious child. The precocious child manifests in a boy when he is eager to learn, when his mind is quickened, when he wants to share what he is learning with the others. There's a glint in his eye and an energy of body and mind that shows he is adventuring in the world of ideas. This boy, and later the man, who wants to know the why of everything. He asks his parents, why is the sky blue? Why do the leaves fall? Why do things have to die? He wants to know the how of things, the what and the where. He often learns to read at an early age so that he can answer his own questions. He's usually a good student and an eager participant in class discussions. Often this boy is also talented in one or more areas. He may be able to draw and paint well, or play a musical instrument with proficiency. He may also be good at sports. The precocious child is the source of so-called prodigies. The precocious child is the origin of our curiosity and our adventurous impulses. He urges us to be explorers and pioneers of the unknown, the strange and mysterious. He causes us to wonder at the world around us and the world inside us. A boy for whom the precocious child is a powerful influence wants to know what makes other people tick, as well as what makes himself tick. He wants to know why people act the way they do, why he has the feelings he has. He tends to be introverted and reflective, and he is able to see the hidden connections in things. He can achieve cognitive detachment from the people around him long before his peers are able to accomplish this. Though introverted and reflective, he is also extroverted and eagerly reaches out to others to share his insights and his talents with them. He often experiences a powerful urge to help others with his knowledge, and his friends often come to him for a shoulder to cry on as well for help with their schoolwork. The precocious child in a man keeps his sense of wonder and curiosity alive, stimulates his intellect, and moves him in the direction of the mature magician. The bipolar shadow of the precocious child, like all the shadow forms of the archetypes of the immature masculine, can be carried over into adulthood, where it causes would-be men to manifest inappropriate infantilism in their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The know-it-all trickster is, as the name implies, that immature masculine energy that plays tricks of a more or less serious nature in one's own life and on others. He is expert at creating appearances and then selling us on those appearances. He seduces people into believing him, and then he pulls the rug out from under them. He gets us to believe in him, to trust him, and then he betrays us and laughs at our misery. He leads us to a paradise in the jungle, only to serve us a feast of cyanide. He's always looking for a sucker. He is the practical joker, adept at making fools of us. He is a manipulator. The know-it-all is that aspect of the trickster in a boy or a man that enjoys intimidating others. The boy or man, under the power of the know-it-all, shoots off his mouth a lot. He's always got his hand up in class, not because he wants to participate in the discussion, but because he wants his classmates to understand that he is more intelligent than they are. He wants to trick them into believing that compared to him, they are dolts. The boy possessed by the know-it-all, however, does not necessarily limit his exaggerated precociousness to intellectual showmanship. He may be a know-it-all about any subject or activity. A boy from a wealthy English family came to the United States one summer to spend a month in a YMCA camp. He spent much of his time telling the other boys, whom he called plebs. Wow, he was before his time on that one. Holy cow. He spent much of his time telling the other boys, whom he called plebs, all about his many travels in Europe and Asia with his diplomat father. When the other boy asked about the details of this or that foreign city, the English boy would respond with, "You stupid Americans, the only thing you know about is your cornfields." And he performed his "I'm superior to you" show in a British upper crust accent. Needless to say, the American boys felt ashamed and angry. The boy or man under the power of the know-it-all makes many enemies. He is verbally abusive of others, whom he regards as his inferiors. As a result, in grade school, he can often be found on the bottom of a pile of angry boys who are whacking away at him. Oh, sign me up. Wait, not boys. I mean, when I was a boy, but I'm a man. As a result, in grade school, he can often be found on the bottom of a pile of angry boys who are whacking away at him. He comes away from these encounters with black eyes, but with a defiant conviction of his own superiority. In one extreme case that we know of, the know-it-all boy came to believe that he was the second coming of Jesus Christ. The only thing he couldn't figure out was why no one seemed to recognize him. The know-it-all man who is still possessed by this infantile shadow form of the precocious child wears his superiority in his suspenders and in his business suits, carries it in his briefcase, and displays it in his "I'm too busy and too important to talk with you now" attitude. He's characteristically smug and often wears a cocky grin. He frequently dominates conversations, turning friendly discussions into lectures and arguments into diatribes. He depreciates those who don't know what he knows, or who hold opinions that differ from his. Because the trickster is the umbrella complex under which the know-it-all operates, the man caught in this infantile influence is usually deceiving others, and perhaps himself as well, about the depths of his knowledge or the level of his importance. But he also has a positive side. He's very good at deflating egos, our own and those of others. And often we need deflating. He can spot in an instant when and exactly what way we are inflated and identified with our grandiosity, and he goes for it in order to reduce us to human size and expose us to all of our frailties. This was the role of the fool in the king's court of medieval Europe. When everyone else at a great ceremony was adoring the king, and the king himself was beginning to adore the king, the fool would caper into the middle of the ceremonies and fart He was saying, don't get inflated. All of us here are only human beings, no matter what status we accord each other. He would caper into the middle of ceremonies and rip nasty ass all over everybody. He would toot his flatulating trumpet into their faces, and all of us here are only human beings, no matter what status we accord each other. Jesus in the Bible calls Satan the father of lies, thus identifying Satan with the trickster in his negative aspect. However, in a roundabout way, the Bible also shows Satan, the trickster, in a positive light, though most of us have probably missed this. The story of Job, for instance, depicts a relationship of mutual respect between Job and God. God has given Job great wealth and material security, health, and a large family. Job, for his part, ceaselessly praises God. It's a mutual admiration society. Then in comes Satan, sniffing out the hypocrisy in the whole thing. He's a troublemaker for the sake of truth. His idea is that if God curses Job, Job will eventually stop singing the Lord's praises. God doesn't want to believe Satan, but he goes along with the plan, probably instinctively knowing that Satan is right. And he is. Once God has taken away everything Job had, his family, his wealth, his health, Job finally throws off his superficial piety, shakes his fists at God, and rips him up one side and down the other. God responds by intimidating Job. Even in the story of the Garden of Eden, Satan makes trouble for the sake of exposing the fraudulent and delusional nature of the supposedly good creation. God wanted to believe that everything he had made was good, but then, after all, he had made evil and hung it on the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Satan, in the form of the serpent, was determined to expose the shadow side of this all-good creation. He succeeded through the fall of Adam and Eve. Only after Satan had exposed the evil in creation, and by implication in the Creator, could honesty and healing begin. The young gang members in West Side Story, who in a clowning and tricksterish way tried to make excuses for themselves and their destructive behavior to their mock-up officer Krupke, are actually and quite accurately exposing the other side, the shadow side, the less than idyllic side of the society that made them what they are. How does the trickster work? Let's say that you are preparing to give what you regard as the most brilliant presentation of your life. You're so proud of your special insights. You sit down at the computer and order it to print out the notes you had put into it earlier, and the printer doesn't work. Your own inner trickster has tricked you. Or you're going to make an appearance at an important function. You're timing it so that you know everyone will be waiting for you, just for a few minutes, just long enough for them to realize how important you are. You go to the car at last, preparing to make your triumphal journey, and you can't find your keys. There they are, locked in the car, still in the ignition. Hubris leads to nemesis. This is how the trickster works against us. In the long run, perhaps for us. But he works through us against others too. Maybe you're the practical joker, mercilessly hounding others with your pranks until someone does you one better and you are forced to realize how much it hurts. You're the car salesman who cheats your customers on the true markup of the car, and then management treats you on your commission. Cheats you on your commission. We once knew a graduate student who was really possessed by this aspect of the archetype. He couldn't stop exposing others' weaknesses through his charming and not so charming humor at their expense. He laughed at his professor's blunders in the classroom. He laughed when the president of the school stumbled over his words. He himself had political aspirations, hoping to create a student movement for his favorite cause, but he alienated the very people he needed as supporters and mentors. His tricksterous behavior finally isolated him and left him powerless. It was only afterward, in therapy, when he had made himself familiar with the possessing force of this archetype by studying Native American portrayals of the trickster, that he was able to free himself of his compulsive and self-destructive behavior. Perhaps the most familiar trickster is in the Bible, in the story of Jacob and Esau, and how Jacob got Esau's birthright through selling him a bowl of soup. Jacob tricked his older brother into giving up all his rightful status and wealth as the heir to their father's fortune. Through manipulation, he took what was not his. We need to clearly understand this immature energy. Though its purpose in its positive mode seems to be to expose lies, if it is left unchecked, it moves us into its negative side and becomes destructive of oneself and others. For the negative side of this immature masculine energy is really hostile and deprecating of all the real effort, all the rights, all the beauty of others. The trickster, like the high chair tyrant, does not want to do anything himself. He does not want to honestly earn anything. He just wants to be, and to be what he has no right to be. He is, in psychological language, passive-aggressive. This is the energy form that seeks the fall of great men, that delights in the destruction of a man of importance. But the trickster does not want to replace the man who has fallen. He does not want to take up that man's responsibilities. In fact, he doesn't want any responsibilities. He wants to do just enough to wreck things for others. The trickster causes a boy or a boyish man to have an authority problem. Such a boy or man can always find a man to hate him and eventually shoot him down. He will readily believe that all men in power are corrupt and abusive, but like the man possessed by the weakling prince, he is condemned forever to be on the outskirts of life, never able to take responsibility for himself or his actions. His energy comes from envy. The less a man is in touch with his true talents and abilities, the more he will envy others. If we envy a lot, we are denying our own realistic greatness, our own divine child. What we need to do then is to get in touch with our own specialness, our own beauty, and our own creativity. Envy blocks creativity. The trickster is the archetype that rushes in to fill the vacuum in the immature man or boy left by the boy's denial of and lack of connection with the divine child. The trickster gets activated developmentally within us when we have been depreciated and attacked by our parents or older siblings, when we have been emotionally abused. If we don't feel our real specialness, we will come under the power of the trickster, the know-it-all, and deflate others' sense of their specialness, even when such deflation is not called for. The know-it-all trickster has no heroes, because to have heroes is to admire others. We can only admire others if we have a sense of our own worthiness and a developing sense of security about our own creative energies.